It was a crisp autumn evening in October, the kind where the air bites at your skin and the leaves crunch underfoot. I had just landed in Edinburgh, Scotland, a city renowned for its history and haunted tales. The trip was meant to be a reprieve from my hectic life in New York, but I had no idea that it would soon turn into a nightmarish ordeal. After checking into a quaint bed and breakfast near the Royal Mile, I decided to explore the city's famous haunted locations. My first stop was Mary King's Close, a historic street buried under the Royal Mile and shrouded in ghost stories. As I walked through the narrow, dimly lit alleyways, a chill ran down my spine. The guide's tales of plague victims and restless spirits added to the eerie atmosphere, but it was the lingering feeling of being watched that truly unnerved me. As the tour ended, I noticed a local man, Alex, who seemed particularly knowledgeable about the city's haunted spots. He approached me with a knowing smile. "You look like someone who enjoys a good ghost story," he said. His Scottish accent was thick but comforting. "I do, actually," I replied, trying to mask my unease. "There's a place not far from here, Greyfriars Kirkyard. They say it's one of the most haunted graveyards in the world. Fancy a visit?" His eyes twinkled with a mix of excitement and mischief. Despite my better judgment, I agreed. The idea of a haunted graveyard intrigued me more than it scared me. We made our way through the winding streets of Edinburgh, the ancient buildings casting long, sinister shadows in the moonlight. Greyfriars Kirkyard was everything I had imagined and more. The tombstones were old and weathered, some dating back centuries. The air was thick with a sense of history and sorrow. As we walked through the graveyard, Alex shared stories of the infamous Mackenzie poltergeist and other restless spirits said to roam the grounds. "I've been here many times," Alex said, his voice low. "But there's one part of the kirkyard that I always avoid, the Black Mausoleum. They say those who enter it often don't leave the same." Curiosity piqued, I pressed him for more details. "What happens to them?" "Strange things," he replied, his eyes darkening. "People report sudden illnesses, strange marks on their bodies, and even violent poltergeist activity. Despite the warnings, I felt an inexplicable pull towards the mausoleum. "Can we go there?" I asked, my voice betraying a mix of excitement and apprehension. Alex hesitated but eventually nodded. "Just remember, I warned you." The Black Mausoleum was tucked away in a secluded corner of the graveyard. Its imposing stone structure loomed ominously, casting a dark shadow over the surrounding tombstones. As we approached, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees, and a heavy sense of foreboding settled over me. Alex stopped at the entrance, his face pale. "This is as far as I go," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Good luck." With a deep breath, I stepped inside. The air was thick and suffocating, carrying the unmistakable scent of decay. The darkness was almost tangible, pressing in on me from all sides. I took out my flashlight, its weak beam barely piercing the gloom. As I moved deeper into the mausoleum, the atmosphere grew heavier. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on my forehead. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind blew past me, extinguishing my flashlight. I was plunged into darkness. Panic set in, and I fumbled to turn the flashlight back on. When I finally managed to do so, I was met with a horrifying sight. Standing before me was a translucent figure, its hollow eyes staring into mine. It was a woman dressed in tattered clothes from a bygone era. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Frozen with fear, I could only watch as she raised a bony finger and pointed towards the exit. Summoning every ounce of courage, I turned and fled, the image of her haunting face etched into my mind. I burst out of the mausoleum, gasping for air. Alex was waiting for me, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked, grabbing my arm to steady me. I saw something," I stammered. "A woman. She was there, right in front of me." Alex's expression grew serious. "You're not the first to see her. They say she was one of the plague victims, buried alive in the mausoleum." The rest of the night passed in a blur. I couldn't shake the image of the ghostly woman from my mind. Even after returning to my bed and breakfast, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her hollow eyes staring back at me. The next few days were uneventful, but the encounter at Greyfriars Kirkyard left a lasting impression. I decided to cut my trip short and return to New York, hoping the familiarity of home would help me forget the terror I had experienced. However, as soon as I stepped into my apartment, I knew something was wrong. The air felt heavy, and a strange chill permeated the room. Objects seemed to move on their own, and I could hear faint whispers in the dead of night. Desperate, I reached out to a paranormal investigator, Dr. Evelyn Carter. She arrived at my apartment with a team of experts and a plethora of equipment. As they set up their devices, Dr. Carter explained that spirits often attach themselves to people who visit haunted locations. "You may have brought something back with you," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "We'll do our best to help you." The investigation revealed high levels of electromagnetic activity in my apartment, particularly in my bedroom. Dr. Carter conducted a séance, hoping to communicate with the spirit. As she chanted in a language I couldn't understand, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Suddenly, the ghostly woman from the mausoleum appeared, her hollow eyes filled with sorrow. Through Dr. Carter, she revealed her tragic story. She had been falsely accused of witchcraft and buried alive in the Black Mausoleum. Her spirit was restless, seeking justice and peace. Moved by her plight, I promised to help. With Dr. Carter's guidance, we performed a ritual to cleanse the spirit and help her find peace. As the ritual concluded, the woman's ghostly figure began to fade, a look of gratitude in her eyes. In the days following the ritual, the strange occurrences in my apartment ceased. The air felt lighter, and the whispers were gone. I finally felt at peace, knowing that I had helped a tormented soul find rest. The experience left me with a newfound respect for the paranormal and a deeper understanding of the unseen world around us. I continued my travels, but I was more cautious, always mindful of the spirits that might be lingering in the shadows. And so, my journey into the unknown ended, but the memories of that haunted night in Edinburgh stayed with me. They were a reminder that sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that are real. I had just moved into a new apartment in Toronto, Canada. It was a modern high-rise with a stunning view of Lake Ontario, the kind of place that felt like a fresh start after a rough couple of years. The building was known for its luxurious amenities and high-end security, so I felt safe and comfortable from the moment I moved in. The first few days were blissful. I spent my time unpacking, arranging furniture, and getting acquainted with my new surroundings. The neighborhood was vibrant, filled with cafes, parks, and friendly faces. I was particularly excited about the view from my living room window, which showcased the shimmering lake and the CN Tower standing tall in the distance. One evening, after a long day of settling in, I decided to relax with a glass of wine and a movie. The apartment was eerily quiet, but I attributed it to the thick walls and excellent soundproofing. As I sat on the couch, enjoying the tranquility, I noticed a faint humming noise. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it persisted in the background. At first, I thought it might be the refrigerator or the HVAC system, but as I moved around the apartment, the sound seemed to follow me. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off, thinking it was just the building settling or some other benign cause. Over the next few days, the humming noise grew louder and more distinct. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a low, rhythmic vibration that set my nerves on edge. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just part of living in a high-rise, but the sound became impossible to dismiss. One night, as I lay in bed trying to sleep, the humming intensified. It felt like the walls were alive, pulsating with an unseen energy. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the growing sense of unease. Sleep was elusive, and I found myself staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with irrational fears. The next morning, I decided to investigate. I carefully inspected every corner of the apartment, checking for any hidden machinery or electrical issues that could explain the noise. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. The appliances were functioning normally, and the walls appeared solid and unremarkable. My frustration grew as the days passed. The humming continued unabated, a constant presence that gnawed at my sanity. I reached out to the building management, but they assured me there were no known issues with the structure. They sent a maintenance crew to check my apartment, but they found nothing unusual. One evening, as I sat on the couch, the humming reached a fever pitch. It was so loud that I could feel it vibrating through my bones. I stood up, determined to find the source, when I noticed something strange. The lights in the apartment flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. A cold chill ran down my spine as I realized the shadows were moving, independent of the flickering lights. They twisted and writhed, forming shapes that seemed almost humanoid. I blinked, convinced I was hallucinating, but the shadows remained. My heart pounded in my chest as I backed away, my eyes locked on the shifting forms. The humming grew louder, almost deafening, and the shadows seemed to coalesce into a single, dark mass. It moved towards me with a deliberate, menacing slowness. Panicking, I ran to the door and fumbled with the lock. My hands trembled, and for a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it out. But finally, the door swung open, and I bolted into the hallway, the oppressive noise and darkness left behind. I spent the night in a hotel, too afraid to return to the apartment. The next day, I contacted an electrician and a structural engineer, hoping they could provide some answers. They conducted a thorough inspection but found nothing wrong. According to them, the apartment was perfectly normal. Reluctantly, I returned home, trying to convince myself that I had imagined the whole thing. But the humming persisted, a constant reminder that something was terribly wrong. I started to avoid spending time in the apartment, staying out late and finding excuses to be anywhere but there. My social life suffered, and I became increasingly isolated. Friends and family noticed the change in me, but I couldn't explain what was happening. I felt trapped, a prisoner in my own home, with no escape from the relentless noise and the lurking shadows. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, searching for any similar experiences. I stumbled upon a forum dedicated to unexplained phenomena, where people shared stories of encounters with the paranormal and the bizarre. One thread in particular caught my eye. It described an incident in another high-rise building in Toronto, eerily similar to my own experience. The poster claimed that the building was constructed on the site of a former laboratory, where unethical experiments were conducted on human subjects. The experiments involved sound waves and electromagnetic fields, which supposedly left a residual energy that affected the building and its inhabitants. The more I read, the more convinced I became that something similar was happening in my apartment. The humming, the shadows, the flickering lights, it all fit. I reached out to the original poster, hoping for more information. The poster, who went by the name Sam, agreed to meet me. We arranged to meet at a cafe near my apartment, and I was both anxious and eager to hear what he had to say. Sam was a middle-aged man with a weary look in his eyes, as if he had seen too much. He explained that he had experienced the same phenomena in his apartment and had spent years researching the cause. According to him, the building was indeed constructed on the site of an old laboratory, and the residual energy from the experiments was causing the disturbances. Sam believed that the energy was trying to communicate, to reach out to those who could hear it. He warned me that the encounters would become more frequent and intense, and that I needed to be prepared. Armed with this knowledge, I returned to my apartment, determined to confront whatever was lurking there. The humming was louder than ever, a constant, oppressive presence. I sat in the living room, waiting for the inevitable. The shadows appeared again, more defined and menacing than before. They moved with purpose, surrounding me on all sides. The humming reached a crescendo, and I felt a pressure in my head, as if something was trying to force its way into my mind. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the energy wasn't malevolent. It was desperate. It was a remnant of the people who had suffered in the laboratory, their pain and anguish trapped in the building's walls. They were reaching out, seeking acknowledgement and release. With this understanding, I spoke to the shadows, acknowledging their presence and their pain. The humming began to subside, and the shadows slowly receded. The apartment grew quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. In the days that followed, the disturbances ceased. The humming was gone, and the shadows no longer haunted my nights. I knew that I had made a connection, and that in some small way, I had helped those lost souls find some measure of peace. And so, my apartment became a place of solace once more, a reminder of the unseen world around us and the power of understanding and compassion. Moving to a remote ranch in the heart of Wyoming was supposed to be a dream come true. After years of city life, the promise of wide-open spaces, fresh air, and tranquility was irresistible. The property was expansive, stretching as far as the eye could see, with rolling hills, dense forests, and a charming old farmhouse that had seen better days. I arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sun casting long shadows over the golden fields. The air was filled with the earthy scent of hay and the distant calls of wildlife. It was peaceful, almost idyllic. I spent the first few hours exploring the property, marveling at the sheer vastness of it all. As night fell, I settled into the farmhouse, unpacking my belongings and making myself at home. The house had a rustic charm, with creaky wooden floors, antique furniture, and a large stone fireplace that dominated the living room. Felt like stepping back in time. Exhausted from the day's activities, I decided to turn in early. The old bed creaked under my weight as I lay down, and I soon drifted off to sleep, lulled by the gentle sounds of the countryside. I awoke in the middle of the night to an unsettling silence. The usual nocturnal sounds were absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to press in from all sides. A faint, bluish light filtered through the gaps in the curtains, casting strange shadows on the walls. Curious and slightly unnerved, I got out of bed and peered out the window. The source of the light was immediately apparent. A large, glowing orb hovering just above the ground in the middle of the field. It pulsed with a strange energy, bathing the landscape in an otherworldly glow. My heart raced as I watched the orb, unable to comprehend what I was seeing. It was mesmerizing and terrifying all at once. I considered going outside to investigate but thought better of it. Instead, I closed the curtains and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The following morning, I convinced myself that it had been a dream, a figment of my imagination. But as I went about my day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The livestock seemed agitated, and I found several dead birds scattered around the property, their bodies untouched but lifeless. Over the next few nights, the orb returned, each time closer to the farmhouse. It hovered silently, casting its eerie glow over the fields and woods. The sightings were always accompanied by strange occurrences: lights flickering, electronics malfunctioning, and an overwhelming sense of unease. During the day, I tried to go about my routine, but the nights were becoming unbearable. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of hyper-awareness. I began to notice other oddities: footprints that appeared and disappeared in the dirt, strange markings on the trees, and a low-frequency hum that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. I started to document everything, taking notes and photographs in an attempt to make sense of it all. I reached out to the local authorities and neighbors, but they were either skeptical or dismissive. To them, I was just another outsider with wild tales of the unknown. One night, unable to ignore the orb any longer, I decided to confront it. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I stepped out into the cold, my breath visible in the chilly air. The orb was there, larger and more intense than ever, hovering just a few feet above the ground. As I approached, the air around me seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. My flashlight flickered and died, and the camera refused to function. The orb pulsed, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me. A mix of fear, curiosity, and a deep, inexplicable sadness. Suddenly, the orb split into several smaller orbs, each darting off in different directions. One of them shot towards the farmhouse, and I turned to follow it. It moved with incredible speed, weaving through the trees and over the fields, before disappearing into the woods. Breathing heavily, I returned to the farmhouse, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that the orb was trying to communicate, to show me something. But what? Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, I spent the next few days researching similar phenomena. I stumbled upon stories of strange lights and electromagnetic anomalies in rural areas, often linked to old military experiments or natural geological formations. But nothing quite matched what I was experiencing. One evening, as I was reviewing my notes, I noticed something strange. In several of the photographs I had taken, there were faint, almost imperceptible shapes in the background, figures that seemed to blend into the landscape. I enhanced the images as best I could, and the shapes became clearer. They were humanoid, with elongated limbs and large, almond-shaped eyes. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. These weren't just orbs of light. They were entities, beings of some kind. But why were they here? And what did they want? As the days turned into weeks, the activity intensified. The orbs appeared almost nightly, and the strange occurrences became more frequent. It was as if the entities were growing bolder, less concerned with hiding their presence. I began to notice patterns in their behavior. The orbs seemed to congregate around certain areas of the property, particularly near the old barn and a small, overgrown grove at the edge of the woods. I decided to investigate these spots more thoroughly. In the barn, I found old equipment and documents that hinted at a secretive research project conducted decades ago. The papers were yellowed and brittle, but I could make out references to experiments involving electromagnetic fields and human cognition. The grove was even more intriguing. Hidden beneath the thick underbrush, I discovered a small metal hatch. It was rusted and covered in moss, but I managed to pry it open. Inside was a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. With a flashlight in hand, I descended the stairs, the air growing colder with each step. The passage led to a small underground chamber, filled with old machines and equipment. It looked like a makeshift laboratory, long abandoned but still intact. As I explored the chamber, I found more documents, journals detailing experiments conducted on unwilling subjects. The goal seemed to be the enhancement of human cognitive abilities through exposure to high-frequency electromagnetic fields. The results were mixed, but there were references to unexpected side effects, and anomalous phenomena. It became clear that the entities I had encountered were not from another world, but the result of these experiments. The researchers had inadvertently created a rift, a tear in the fabric of reality that allowed these beings to manifest in our world. As I absorbed this information, the orbs appeared again, filling the chamber with their eerie light. But this time I wasn't afraid. I felt a strange sense of understanding, of connection. The entities were not here to harm me, but to seek help, to find a way to close the rift and return to their own dimension. With this newfound knowledge, I knew what I had to do. Using the equipment in the chamber, I attempted to reverse the process, to seal the rift and send the entities back to where they belonged. It was a long shot, but it was the only option. The process was arduous and filled with uncertainty, but slowly, the rift began to close. The orbs pulsed with a brighter light, as if acknowledging my efforts. Finally, with a final burst of energy, the rift sealed shut, and the orbs vanished. I stood in the now silent chamber, exhausted but relieved. The nightmare was over. I had uncovered a dark chapter of human experimentation and, in doing so, had restored balance to my new home. As I climbed back up the stairs and emerged into the cool night air, I felt a sense of peace. The ranch was once again a place of tranquility, and I knew that I had been part of something extraordinary, something that would stay with me forever. Life on the ranch returned to normal, but I remained vigilant, always aware of the unseen forces that had once intruded upon my life. The experience had changed me, deepening my understanding of the world and the hidden mysteries that lie just beyond our perception. Thank you for watching our stories about paranormal activities. Did you enjoy it? How do you feel about them? We'd love to know what you think about these stories in the comments below. If you want more stories based on real-life events or fictionals, click on the video appearing on your screen now, or you can check the other horror stories playlist right there. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales. See you in the next video.